Hi, this is Rachel Cassady with the State Division of Drinking Water, and I'm going to give you a presentation on the life cycle of a violation. If you are in charge of or employed with a public water system, then you're regulated by the State Division of Drinking Water here in Utah, and chances are you may have or may not, hopefully not, but it's likely that you've run into the great opportunity of getting a violation. And I just want to talk about what happens when you get a violation, how do you get a violation, what types of violations there are that are available for for your system to get, and then also how to get rid of them once you get them, which is the most important part of the presentation. So before I get into it, let me give you my contact information so that if you have any questions during or after this presentation, you can contact me. My phone number is 801 536 4467, and my email address is rcassady, Cassady, at utah.gov. So please feel free to contact me if you have any questions about this. So let's dive in to the life cycle of a violation. And there's my contact information super close up. Okay, so there's two main types of violations. The first type of violation that we give out is for a failure to sample, and that is when there's a requirement to sample and the sample was not taken. The second type is a quality violation, but let's talk about this failure to sample first. There's a major and a minor type of these violations. The major type is when the water system did not take a sample when it was due to be taken. The minor version means that the water system took some of the samples that were required, but not all of the samples. So an example of this would be if your water system had a positive coliform sample and you were supposed to take 4 repeats, but you only took 3. So that would just be a minor repeat sampling violation because you took some of them, but you didn't take all of them. So that's a minor violation. That usually causes these violations cause a lot of concern and angst because you get a letter fairly quickly from the Division of Drinking Water notifying you of the violation, but they're fairly easy to clear up, a little bit more easy to deal with than the second type of violation, which is a quality violation. So quality violation, there's a couple of different kinds. The first kind is for chemical sampling. For your chemical sampling requirements, what happens is if you're taking your regular samples and you get a sample, let's say, for example, arsenic, you get an arsenic result that's over the MCL of 10 parts per billion. Let's say your result is 12. So just because you have that one chemical sample that's over the limit of 10 does not mean that you're immediately in violation. What it means is that you'll get a letter from the Division of Drinking Water notifying you to start sampling quarterly for that particular analyte. And after a year of sampling quarterly, then we take the average of those results and we compare that average to the MCL, which is our lingo, our acronym for the maximum contaminant level. So we'll compare the average of quarterly samples for 1 year to the maximum contaminant level before we determine if there is indeed a quality violation. So just because you've had one high sample does not mean it's a quality violation. It just means you go to quarterly sampling. Now, your question for me is, how do I know if I am in this quarterly sampling period for any of the contaminants that I sample for? And the answer to that is you should already know if you're one of the systems in that boat. And if you do not know, or you question your quarterly sampling that you're currently in, for example, you want to know how much longer you're going to be sampling quarterly, then I want you to call me. My number again is 801 536 4467. So please, if you're wondering if you're in this situation, just give me a call and I'll let you know. Or you can check your monitoring schedule online. That's an easy way to see if you're sampling quarterly for any of the contaminants, the chemical contaminants. So that's how you get a chemical quality violation. It takes a year after that first high sample, a year of operation and quarterly sampling to figure out if you have a chemical quality violation. So then the next category of quality violations is for coliform bacteria. For your total coliform sampling, you have two types of quality violations. The first is confirmed fecal coliform contamination, which we call an acute quality violation, and that means that you've had more than one sample have at least total coliform positive. Well, both two samples, two separate points in time. One is at least total coliform positive, the other one is at least fecal or E. coli positive. That means that you've confirmed with follow up sampling at a second point in time that the initial coliform or fecal E. coli sample was indeed accurate, and then that what that is it results in you have 24 hours to notify the public and you're doing a boil order. If you fall into this situation with this confirmed fecal contamination, we'll be on the phone with you as soon as we get the results from the lab and walk you through the public notice and the boil order. So the second type of coliform quality violation is called a non-acute quality violation. And what that is it's this section here where you have more than one total coliform positive sample in the month if you take less than 40 samples, routine samples a month. Or if you take more than 40 routine samples a month, it means that more than 5% of your samples are total coliform positive during the month. So there's this acute, which is this first part right here, and that's 24 hours to notify the public and issue a boil order. And there's the non-acute, which is this second section right here. And the non-acute means that you have 30 days to notify the public, and hopefully you're calling us and working with us, probably the Rural Water Association as well, to try to figure out what's going on in the system to solve the problem. So for these quality violations, you're probably looking at some sort of treatment. You're going to be needing to take action to remedy the quality problem at the end of the day, because you want it fixed, we want it fixed. We all are in the same business of wanting people to be drinking safe drinking water. So, the next question that you're dying to ask me is, when do staff at the Division of Drinking Water sit down and determine all of these violations? And the answer to that is that we calculate violations at the end of each monitoring period. So here are the different monitoring periods that we operate on for all of our sampling requirements. The first is monthly. If you have a monthly sampling requirement, such as your coliform sampling, then we calculate violations by the 10th of the following month. So in April of 2013, by April 10th, we'll be calculating the violations for failure to sample as well as quality violations. For March, we'll be calculating those for March by April 10th. Quarterly violations, we operate on the calendar quarter. So the first calendar quarter is January through March. And at the end of that calendar quarter, we figure out those violations by April 10th. The second calendar quarter is April 1st through the end of June. And we check for violations for that quarterly sampling by July 10th. The third calendar quarter is July 1st through September 30th, and we calculate those violations by October 10th. And then the last quarter of the year is October 1st through the end of the year, and we calculate those violations by January 10th. If you have a yearly sample, for example, nitrate, or a once every 3, 6, or 9 year sample, then we calculate those violations at the end of the year. We have to report these violations to EPA by February 15th. So kind of our drop dead deadline for our own calculations in-house is February 10th. So you notice these dates are not far after the end of the year. So what I recommend is that if you do have a yearly sample or a quarterly sample or a monthly sample, don't wait until the very end of this period. If you can all avoid it, don't wait until the very end to get these samples taken, because then you just shorten the window of time that you have and the laboratory has to get us a copy of the data. Well, it's your responsibility to make sure that we get a copy of the data, not the laboratory, because at the end of the day, we send the violation letters to you, the water system managers and operators, and not to the laboratories. So you want to make sure you follow up with us and make sure that we have received copies of your data. So anyway, the moral of this whole story, this big long table, is to make sure that you get us your data by the close of these periods, and then also that you are in contact with us before we create these violations, and work with us, help us work with you to avoid any violations if at all possible. So now we've sat down, we've calculated what systems are in violation for what items, and so we send out these what we call NOVs. An NOV is our fancy acronym for notice of violation. It's just a letter, and in the subject line it'll say notice of violation for failure to sample or for quality. Um, it'll describe it in the subject line. But these notices of violations, these NOVs, people often, when I talk to them on the phone, if they've gotten an NOV, they call them the nasty letters. So I think of them as the nasty letters or the NOV. These are the letters that you don't want to get, for sure. But what happens if you get one? These are the consequences. That's what I always tell people. This is what happens if you get a letter. The first thing is that points are added to your IPS report for your water system. And if you're at all familiar with the IPS system, you know that points are bad because IPS is like golf. The more points you have, the worse off you are. And you want to stay under the thresholds of points for your system to stay at an approved rating. So if you're a community system, that threshold is 150 points. If you're a non-transient, non-community system, that threshold is 120 points. And if you're a transient system, that threshold is 100 points. So you want to keep your IPS points low. If you rack up a bunch of violations, get a bunch of NOVs and get a lot of violations, you're running the risk of getting points that will throw your system over that threshold, which means you will get a not approved rating, and then you start down the pathway of enforcement, which is not a pathway we want you to be on, not a pathway that you want to be on. So keep in mind you do get IPS points for when you do get a notice of violation in the mail. The next thing is that public notice is required. Like I said earlier, in regards to those total coliform quality violations, for the quality ones, you would have 24 hours or 30 days to notify the public. But if you just have a failure to sample violation, you will have 1 year to notify the public. And those notices for failure to sample violations, most water systems, community water systems, put those in their consumer confidence report because that is a yearly report. And if you have questions about that, you can contact me and I can walk you through some examples of those in consumer confidence reports. And then the last thing that happens is that we report the violation to EPA. We report all of our data, our violations, our inventory, and our samples to EPA every 3 months at the end of the calendar quarter. So we have to report these to EPA. But the good news here is that we also report to EPA the violations that have returned to compliance. So it's not always bad news that we're sending up to them. Okay, so what happens if you've got one of these notices of violations in the mail? Typically, there's three responses. The first response is that the water system operator did take the sample and we just did not get a copy of it. The second response is that the water system forgot to sample, they had a change in management, for whatever reason, and there's lots of reasons out there, I've heard them all, the water system just failed to take the sample. And then the last response is that the water system gets the notice of violation in the mail and they just don't care, which is unfortunate because you've got to want to serve your customers safe drinking water. And the best way to know that you're serving safe drinking water is to not be getting notices of violation. So let's talk about what to do what happens, what you can do to fix this once you get a notice of violation. So for the first two, this first one, if you did sample or you failed to sample, but you will sample right away, this is what happens. If you did sample and we're just missing a copy of the data, if it's a chemical sampling violation, it's an easy fix. You just send our office a copy of the data, we'll delete the violation, the IPS points are removed, and you do not have to do the public notice because you took the sample when you were supposed to. It's just that we were missing the data. So that's the response to this first one here, if you did sample. Now, if you fail to sample, but you want to remedy the situation, for a chemical sampling violation, it's easy. Just take the sample and send the Division of Drinking Water the data as soon as you can. And what we'll do is we'll remove the violation as soon as we get a copy of the data, which means also that the IPS points get removed. The only thing is that you still have to do public notice in your consumer confidence report or other method that's due once a year because it was indeed a failure to sample. So for those two, for chemical quality, or not chemical quality, but for chemical monitoring violations, these first two are not too bad. It's fairly easy to clear these up, so it's a little bit of a relief. This third one is that you don't care, which I hope none of you are in this boat, but sometimes this does happen. And if a water system just ignores this notice of violation, this is what can happen. You know, your IPS points will add up and your water system rating will eventually drop to a not approved rating, and then you end up with eventual enforcement actions against your system. And then we also report these violations to EPA, and they have their own enforcement tracking list where they have a point system. If their points get to a certain level for certain violations, then they start looking at possible enforcement if they're not happy with our level of enforcement. Our enforcement and EPA's enforcement include administrative orders, compliance agreements, and we also have the authority to administer a penalty. And what a penalty is that's just fancy speak for a fine. So what we always are looking for if we are assessing a penalty is we want to make compliance cheaper than paying the penalty. We'd rather you spend your money on coming into compliance with the rules and regulations so that you do have safe drinking water rather than you writing us a check. We don't want your money. We want you to be in compliance. So the whole point of the penalty is to kind of get the water system to get into compliance as soon as possible. So, but we do have that authority in case we need to use it. So these are the three different reactions when people get a notice of violation for a chemical sampling violation. Now you'll notice in that last bubble I kept saying for a chemical sampling violation. The chemical sampling failure to sample violations are a lot easier to fix than the coliform bacteria failure to sample violations. So you'll notice for the failure to sample chem violations, all you had to do was send us a copy of the data or run out and take the sample as soon as you can. I would say I recommend, if you do end up with an NOV for failure to sample chems, please just make sure you follow up with the Division of Drinking Water myself to make sure that the violation is deleted. And how you can do that is to request a copy of your updated IPS report, or just you can access it online at drinkingwater.utah.gov. On the left-hand side, click on online reports and you can get a copy of your IPS report. Look at that report frequently and make sure that any old violations that should be deleted are in fact deleted. That's important to follow up. Now, the failure to sample coliform bacteria violations, those hang around for a while. They hang around for 1 year of operation, which for a system that's operating year round, it's going to take you 12 months to get rid of the points, the IPS points from not taking the required samples. For a system that's only operational for 3 months out of the year, it's going to take that system 4 months or 12 months of operation, which for them is 4 months, not 4 months, 4 years, because 12 months of operation is going to take 4 calendar years to add up 3 months times 3 plus 3 months plus 3 months plus 3 months will equal 12 months. So you can see how if you're a seasonal system, it's very important that you avoid, if at all possible, any failure to sample violations for your coliform bacteria requirement, because it just takes a lot longer to recover from that. And again, like with the chemical violations, follow up with our office to make sure you get credit for doing your public notice and that the violation is indeed deleted after 1 year of operation. So just keep us on our toes and make sure we're doing our job correctly. There's no harm in that. So what happens if you are with a system that has continued to build up violation after violation after violation without resolving them? And this is what happens. The system is now headed down the pathway of enforcement. So at the Division of Drinking Water, what happens is that your IPS points start to add up, and then your rating, the water system rating, goes from approved to not approved. And then eventually, if you don't respond to this not approved rating, we will start doing administrative orders, or what we call compliance agreements, and then assessing penalties or fines. And again, like I said before, we have this penalty authority, but we prefer that you write the check to come into compliance, so that you're writing a check for infrastructure improvements or treatment or fixing whatever it is you need to fix to come into compliance, rather than sending our office the money. We use this penalty authority to show you that it's cheaper to be in compliance than it is to pay a fine. So EPA, they also have a similar enforcement tracks. If you are a repeat offender on their priority enforcement list, then they make sure that they look over our shoulder and make sure that we're doing enforcement. If they don't like our enforcement, what we're doing for our enforcement, they can step in and do their own notices of violation, administrative orders, and their penalties. And I will say the EPA's penalties, I've seen a few of them, they're a lot more scary and a lot higher dollar amounts than the ones that we've ever sent out. So EPA's enforcement scares me, and I hope it scares you too. So avoid it if at all possible. One thing about all of these enforcement orders, administrative orders, penalty letters, they all have time frames for compliance. So what that means is they'll say, okay, we recognize that there's this problem. You're going to need to somehow secure funding to pay for whatever it is that needs to be fixed. Let's get together and decide that it's going to be fixed 6 months from now or a year from now, or whatever time frame is appropriate for the violation and appropriate for a reasonable time to get it fixed in. So when it comes to enforcement, I always, tell the water systems that I'm working with to not panic about it, but just work with us, and we'll work with you to help you come into compliance as soon as possible, so that everybody on your system is getting safe drinking water. That's the whole point of having our rules and regulations, and the whole point of even having violations is just to keep everybody on track and keep us doing what we're supposed to be doing, taking samples when we're supposed to be taking them, and following up with any issues that may arise during sanitary surveys or in any kind of inspection or sampling event. So again, if you have questions about a violation that your water system has received, please give us a call. And my contact information again is 801-536-4467. My email address is rcassady@utah.gov. And I hope you have a great day. Thanks.